These are threats to an auditor's independence per Gagas. These are threats that an auditor could succumb to. Self-interest threat. This is a threat that a financial or other interest will influence an auditor's judgment or behavior. Now, you can see a sim. I've definitely seen sims like that where it asks you, gives you a situation, and it says which of the 4 threats is this exemplifying. So make sure you're familiar with these. Next, we have management participation threat. This is the threat that an auditor takes on a management role or functions on behalf of the entity under audit. You could say that these could apply to normal audits as well, and that's fair. It's fair. We're just seeing it here, and this is within the governmental Gagas. This is specifically broken out and written about within Gagas, but it does apply to normal audits as well. So there's a lot, as you see, and I've mentioned before, in these 3 ethical lessons, there's just a lot of overlap because in general, it's just be ethical, right? At the core, it's the goal of these is the same. It's just be ethical, have a good ethical audit. Just how are you going to go about it? The specifics and nuances of these logistics make it a little bit different here and there. So we don't want financial or other interest to influence your judgment of behavior. Again, like I said, that applies to normal audits. We don't want the auditor to act on behalf of the entity. That would be a problem. You'd be managing the organization you're supposed to be independent of. That's a problem. Bias threat that an auditor will be influenced by convictions such as politics or ideology, which impairs objectivity. I myself am quite a fan of the ideology of money. Money, it does not lie, and everyone on all sides of the political spectrum abides by it. So make that your political affiliation is money, right? You're doing a job, get paid money, and that's that. Self-review threat. This is the threat that arises from auditors reviewing their own work or the work done by others in their firm. Make sure you are familiar here. Yeah, you could say there's a little overlap. I kind of mentioned a little aspects of self-review threat under here, but making sure that you understand the distinction. This threat is if you are acting on behalf of management. This is the act that you're reviewing your own work. Now, this threat here, the adverse interest threat, this is the threat that the auditor may not act objectively due to their interests being in opposition to those of the client. Now, these are threats to be aware of. These are threats to assess. If you're the lead auditor, you want to make sure that none of these threats are affecting any of your team members, just like the ones we saw previously. Got a bunch of these threats. It's all good. Undue influence threat that external influences will impact an auditor's independence and objectivity. If someone's yelling at you to get the audit done quick and you know you need more time, that's an external influence threat. If you're stressed out by family life at home, that's an external influence threat, right? If you have a spouse yelling at you because, you're auditing. I had an example where someone who was a registered Republican was an auditor and was auditing some subsect of the Democrat National Party. I'm not really sure how that all works, and frankly, I'm not too interested. But he was talking about how he had to maintain independence. Now, he wasn't a crazy political guy, but it's really not his responsibility to have a political thought there. It's to do a job. It's to make sure that the numbers are properly stated, that this government organization is doing its job. It's not embezzling money. So keep your adverse interest threat under control. Doesn't matter if you personally believe something different, right? You could be auditing a normal company, right? Let's forget government for a second. You could be auditing a company that produces a lot of plastic and you're a strong environmentalist. I personally hate plastic. I mean, well, we use it all around, but if we can cut down on that, save the planet. I guess I'm a little bit of a hippie in that regard. Save the planet. But yeah, if you are vehemently against plastic and you're auditing a plastic manufacturer, your job there is to audit the company. Now, once the audit's done, on your own free time, go and protest against the company, right? Now, if we could shape the world in a perfect light, I would love to do that, but it's not what you're supposed to do on the clock. Familiarity threat. This is the threat that the auditor has personal relationships with those working for the entity being audited. That's a concern, right? Independence. Talked about that a little bit in our prior lessons as well. Lastly, here we've got this structural threat. I'm going to read it off, but kind of think of this. I have an example. Think of, let's say your audit firm has gotten into trouble with the IRS, and now you're auditing the IRS. That's going to impair independence and be a concern. It's a threat that an audit organization's placement within a government entity in combination with the structure of the government entity being audited will impact the audit organization's ability to perform work and report results objectively. Again, if you have run into problems with the IRS, you owe the IRS money as an audit firm, and then you're now auditing the IRS, Just like if you owe anyone money or you're in conflict with anyone and then you're supposed to be objective with them, you're going to run into problems there. So that's just one example of what we could talk about with the structural threat. Building on those threats to the auditor's independence, I wanted to give you examples, just some examples I thought were important to be familiar with. What is an example of an advocacy threat? Here we have an entity's accountant intentionally excluding information from third parties for the accountant or the entity's benefit. That's a concern, right? Advocacy, you're supposed to advocate for a proper audit. You're supposed to make sure that you advocate for your own entity. You're supposed to make sure you advocate in whatever line you follow. In this case, the accountant works for the entity, and this accountant is intentionally excluding information for their own benefit or the benefit of the entity they're working for. And that's information that should be presumably included. Next, we have familiarity threat. In this case, we have an entity's accountant that has worked with another accountant for many years. The first accountant signs off on financial statements prepared by the second without reviewing them due to being too trusting and accepting the work results from years of working together. This could just be laziness. It could be trust, right? It doesn't matter. You got to do the work. It's kind of like you're going into a secure building. Don't leave the door open. Even if you see someone behind you, they need to scan in themselves as well. Unfortunately, we don't live in a 100% perfect world. You need to not be too trusting, and you can't succumb to this familiarity threat. Next, we have the undue influence threat. This is pressure from a boss or manager to create misleading information. Pretty straightforward there. The adverse interest threat. This is an accountant's intention to sue the entity they work for or audit. That's a concern. If you are working for an entity and you sue them, you obviously will have an adverse interest, will not have the same interest as them. Both of you want to win. And if you're auditing an entity and you're suing them, well, same thing there. You're both now at odds because of that. Self-review threats, reviewing their own work. That's a concern we will see many, many times. And lastly, here we have an example for a self-interest threat, such as an accountant personally benefiting from their own decisions, such as using particular accounting estimates to meet financial results, which are linked to bonuses. That's definitely a concern in the corporate world. You see that a lot. Quite unfortunate. You could have a lot of higher ups in the C-suite with their bonuses tied to financial performance, earnings per share, anything like that, and then they might skew with the financial data, whether it's doing stock buybacks just to seemingly increase the earnings per share, anything like that. Self-interest threat. You need to act on behalf of the entity that is engaging you, whether you work for the entity or you're auditing an entity. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.